Top 5 Scariest Unsolved Mysteries of All Time. Thousands of terrifying things happen to people every day, but nothing can give you the chills quite like a disturbing unsolved mystery. This is a list of some of the scariest unsolved mysteries of all time. The entries were upvoted and ranked in no particular order. Warning: you may find some of the following content disturbing or distressing. If you are faint-hearted, I recommend to stop watching now. Number 1. The incident at Dyatlov Pass. On the first night of February 1959, 9 ski hikers died mysteriously on a trip in the Ural Mountains of what is now Russia. The night of the incident, the group had set up camp on a slope, enjoyed dinner, and prepared for sleep. But something went catastrophically wrong because the group never returned. On February 26th, almost a month later, searchers found the hikers' abandoned tent. It had been ripped open from the inside. Surrounding the area were footprints left by the group. Upon inspection, they showed that some of the hikers were wearing socks, some wearing a single shoe, and some were barefoot, but all of them continued to the edge of a nearby wood where the first 2 bodies were found shoeless and wearing only underwear. The scene bore marks of death by hypothermia, but as medical examiners inspected the bodies, as well as other 7 bodies that were discovered over the months that followed, hypothermia no longer made sense. In fact, the evidence made no sense at all. One body had evidence of a blunt force trauma consistent with brutal assault. Another had 3rd-degree burns. One had been vomiting blood. One had a missing tongue. And some of their clothing was found to be radioactive. Theories floated around including KGB interference, drug overdose, gravity anomalies, the Russian version of the Yeti, and even UFOs. Recently, a documentary filmmaker presented a theory involving a terrifying but real phenomenon called infrasound, in which the wind interacts with the topography to create a barely audible hum that can nevertheless induce powerful feelings of nausea, panic, dread, chills, nervousness, raising heartbeat rate, and breathing difficulties. The only consensus remains that whatever happened involved an overwhelming and possibly inhuman force. The real cause of the incident is yet to be found. It remains one of the strangest mysteries to date. Number 2. The Roman Jars. It's not unusual to find junk in Guanabara Bay, Brazil. But what Robert Marks unearthed there in 1982 was an unusual kind of foreign matter. In an underwater field the size of 3 tennis courts located 15 miles from the shore lay the remains of some 200 Roman ceramic jars, a few fully intact. According to Marks, a professional treasure hunter, the jars appeared to be twin-handled amphorae that were used to transport goods such as grain and wine in the 3rd century. But how did they get there? The first Europeans didn't reach Brazil until the 1500s. The Romans, who traded primarily with Mediterranean port cities in the Middle East, had little incentive to invest in ships that could cross oceans. However, they did sail as far as India. Perhaps some untrained navigator lost his way in a storm, or maybe mutineers steered the ship westward. Whilst imagining the reason of how the jars got there is interesting, some have begun to wonder what happened to the people who took them. Disease, starvation, or native South American civilizations. All we know is, whoever took the jars across the Atlantic never returned to the rest of civilization to tell that tale. We may never know, nor are we likely to uncover more evidence. Brazil closed the Bay of Jars to further research in 1983 in an effort to deter looters, it said. Marks claims the government didn't want the area explored because finding Roman-era artifacts there would mean that, contrary to Brazil's official history, the Portuguese were not the first Europeans to reach the country. As for the truth, it's resting 100 feet at the bottom of the sea. Number 3. Finding Walter Collins. In March 1928, a single mom called Christine Collins gave her 9-year-old son Walter some pocket money to go to the cinema. That same night, however, she called the Los Angeles Police Department to report that he hadn't returned home after the movie, and he was filed as missing. Days passed with no positive news, and Christine, family, and friends grew increasingly concerned and prepared for the worst. The more the days passed, the more the police faced negative publicity and increasing public pressure to solve the case. Then, a whole 5 months later, in what was published as a fantastic job by the press, the police brought Walter back to Christine, having found him through a lead far from his home in LA. The case was finally declared closed. Except, there was one small problem. The kid wasn't Walter, and Christine knew it. The LAPD dismissed Christine's initial concerns, telling her to take the boy home and give him a try. Weeks later, Christine returned even more upset and adamant that the boy wasn't her son. But the police insisted that she was confused, going so far as to accuse her of terrible mothering and eventually had her committed to a mental hospital. The real Walter Collins was never found, and over time, authorities came to believe he was one of the victims of convicted child murderer Gordon Stewart Northcott, although Northcott's mother offered a confession for killing Walter. Whatever happened to Walter Collins, his body was never found, and no one ever learned what really happened. Nor has it been established with any certainty why the police were so invested in covering up the boy's disappearance that they brought a different child back to Christine and tried to convince her and the rest of the world that it was Walter. In 2008, Clint Eastwood's film Changeling reawakened interest in what is one of the most bizarre and tragic crime stories of the 1920s. Number 4. The Living Statues. From 1917 to 1928, 500,000 people were afflicted with a terrifying condition that could honestly be part of the plotline of a horror film. The victims, very much alive and conscious, found themselves in inexplicably frozen states, their static bodies prisons for their own minds. Encephalitis lethargica, also known as the sleeping sickness, first appeared in Europe and quickly spread around the world, reaching epidemic levels in North America, Europe, and India by 1919. About a third of those stricken with the illness died. Of the survivors, nearly half eventually found themselves unable to physically interact with the world around them, all the while fully aware of their surroundings. Though occasionally capable of limited speech, eye motion, and even laughter, they generally appeared as living statues, totally motionless for hours, days, weeks, or even years. And the cause? It remains unknown. One theory is brain inflammation, perhaps triggered by a rare strain of Streptococcus, the bacteria responsible for many sore throats each year. Science's best guess is that the bacteria mutated, provoking the immune system to attack the brain, leaving the victim helpless. But none of this explains why the illness disappeared only to resurface for short periods, from a sudden bustle of cases in Europe in the 1950s to China 10 years ago, when a 12-year-old girl was hospitalized for 5 weeks and deemed to have the disease. There also exists more supernatural theories, such as curses, secret organizations, biological weapons, and even aliens. Imagining the symptoms occurring upon the sight of something so horrific that the victims freeze and become unable to ever move again sounds like some real Medusa supporting stuff. Whether the nightmarish disease is the result of a strain of bacteria on our body or something more supernatural, the sleeping sickness remains a mystery feared by so many that most governments and medical institutions prefer to keep the records safely stored away from attention. Number 5. The Missing Plane. Taking place on March 8, 2014, the last of this collection of unsolved mysteries happened much more recently than the rest. While flying from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia to Beijing, China, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 passengers and crew members vanished into thin air. I'm sure many of you have heard of Flight MH370, but take a moment to actually think about this. With all the communication systems, technology, and population that existed in 2014, how did an entire passenger plane simply just disappear? A multinational search effort, the largest in aviation history, has turned up amid 20 small pieces of aircraft debris, and it is unsure whether all of it belongs to the missing jet or not. The Prime Minister of Malaysia has declined to comment other than to say that the aircraft disappeared over the Indian Ocean. The lack of closure has given rise to multiple theories, many of which are considered conspiracies, which, according to Harvard professor Cass Sunstein, are a natural product of horrific and disastrous situations because such events make people angry, fearful, and looking for a target. Nevertheless, these theories are intriguing and include hijacking, capture by the United States, crew suicide, as it was reported that the pilot was having marital problems, a fire aboard the aircraft, vertical entry into the sea, a meteor strike, and even alien abduction. Almost a decade later, and at the expense of millions, scouring thousands of square miles of ocean, the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 and the 239 people aboard undoubtedly remains one of the scariest recent mysteries. These were our top 5 scariest unsolved mysteries of all time. Do you have a mystery you think deserves to be on the list? Let us know in the comments and your mystery could be included in a part 2 video. Don't forget to leave a like and show support, and subscribe for more interesting and mysterious videos. Thanks for watching.